doesn't.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
We're going to begin with Hinei Matov U'Manayim. It's on page 128. It's a quote that comes from Psalm 133 that expresses how wonderful it is when we have an opportunity to dwell together.
Hinei Matov U'Manayim Shedelachim Gam Yachad. 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 Hinei Matov U'Manayim Shedelachim Gam Yachad.
We begin Shabbat by kindling the Shabbat candles to welcome in the light of Shabbat, the light of God. I'd like to invite Marilyn Leaf up to kindle the Shabbat candles and to say the blessing on page 120.
I have to find 120 first. I found it. Now I have to hope they light.
I think they will.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu v'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Amen.
Blessed art you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to kindle the lights of Shabbat.
Amen. Thank you. Yasher Koach. We're going to continue on page 138 with Lachado D, a poem that was written in the 16th century to greet Shabbat as though Shabbat is our bride.
Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala B'nei Shabbat Kabbalat. 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 Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, Ishmi'anu el hamiuchad, Adonai echad u'shemo echad, L'shemo tiferet v'litila. Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala B'nei Shabbat Kabbalat. Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala B'nei Shabbat Kabbalat. Likrat Shabbat lechu b'melcha, ki mekor haberacha, merosh v'kedem nesucha, sof ma'aseh b'machshevat chila. Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala B'nei Shabbat Kabbalat. Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala B'nei Shabbat Kabbalat. Hitoreri, ki ba'oreh kumi ori, uri, shir daberi, kevod Adonai alayich nitla. Vayikra Kabbalat, Penei Shabbat Kabbalat.
The last verse is our custom to rise and to face the door to greet the Sabbath Queen.
Ba'oi v'shalom ha'ateret ba'ala, gam b'simcha u'betzola, toch emunei am segula, ba'oi chala, ba'oi chala. Lecha dodi, lecha dodi likrat gala, penei Shabbat mekabela, lecha dodi likrat gala, penei Shabbat mekabela.
You may be seated. We continue on page 142, the last of our sort of opening songs, Shalom Aleichem, a song that seeks peace on Shabbat and seeks the peace as though we're visited by angels at this time.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mi-melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Lo'echem l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi-melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu mi-l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi-melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Techen l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi-melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
We rise again as we turn to page 144 for the Chatzi Kaddish, the prayer that transitions us from this opening section to the Shema section of our service.
Yitzkadash, Yitzkadash, Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Yamati v'rach hirutei v'yamich malchutei.
Becha yechonu yom echad, u'chayechu beit Yisrael. Ba'agala, ba'agala, u'bizman karev.
V'yimeru.
Amen.
Yehi
Shmei Rabbah mevorach, le'olam le'omei omaya, Yisbarach.
Yivarach, v'yishtabach, v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnasei, v'yitadar, v'yit'aleh, v'yithalal, shemei d'kudashah,
Yerichu.
le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata.
Tush bechata b'nechem ata, ta'amiran be'alma.
V'yimeru.
Amen.
Barechu et Adonai, HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai, HaMevorach, le'olam va'ed.
May be seated. Continue on page 149, together at the top of the page. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars, creator of the tide of time and light. You guide the current of day into night, As heaven spans to infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Baruch atah Adonai, ha'ariv ha'ravim. That evening's just a little bit later now. The sun's out a little longer after the time change. Feels different.
And we continue with Ahavat Olam on page 150.
Ahavat Olam, Beit Yisrael, Amcha ahavta, Torah u'mitzvot, Chukim u'mishpatim, Otanu limadeta, Otanu limadeta. Alkein Adonai Eloheinu v'shokmeinu, Uvkumeinu nasiach b'chulkecha, v'nismach b'divrei Toratecha, u'mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed. Ki hem chayenu, ve'oret yameinu, uvahem nege yomam v'layla, nege yomam v'layla, v'ahavatcha al tasir, mimenu le'olamim. Baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed.
We continue with the Ahavta, page 154.
Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levacha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'otecha. Ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher Anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinatam levanecha v'dibarta ba'am v'shivtecha b'beitecha u'b'lechtecha b'derech u'b'shokbecha u'b'kumecha u'kshartam levot al yadecha ve'hayu letotafot bein einecha u'chtaftam al mezuzot beitecha u'b'sharecha למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, הייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם. Page 157, we continue with the responsive reading at the bottom of the page. In a world torn by violence and pain, a world far from wholeness and peace, give us the courage to say, Adonai, there is one God in heaven and earth.
The high heavens declare your glory. May earth reveal your justice and love.
From bondage in Egypt we were delivered. At Sinai we bound ourselves to your way.
Inspired by prophets and instructed by sages, time and again we overcame oppressive forces.
Though our failings are many and our faults are great, it has been our glory to bear witness to our God, keeping alive in dark ages your vision of a world redeemed.
Let us continue to work for the day when the nations will be one and at peace.
Then shall we rejoice as Israel did, singing on the shores of the sea.
Mi chamocha b'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nedar b'kodesh, nora tehilot, o seifele, nora tehilot, o seifele. Mohutecha, ra'u vanecha, bokei hayam, lifnei Moshe u'Miriam. Seili, anu ve'ameru, Adonai yimloch
Leolam va'ed,
Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. V'ne'emar ki pad Adonai et Yaakov u'be'lo mi'et chazak mimeno, Baruch atah Adonai Yisrael.
Page 161, at the top of the page, we have the Hashkivenu. It's a prayer that prays for all of us, everyone, to enjoy the shelter of peace. We begin with the English, followed by the melody. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up waiting to do your will.
Baruch atah Adonai haborei sukkah shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael. Ve'al Yerushalayim ve'al kol amo. Ve'al Yerushalayim shalom. Ve'al Yerushalayim ve'al kol amo. Ve'al Yerushalayim shalom. Baruch atah Adonai haborei sukkah shalom. Shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael.
Page 162, we begin with Vishamru, a prayer that's really a recitation from the Torah from Exodus chapter 31, reminding us that it is the Jewish tradition to observe and to enjoy Shabbat.
Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam berit olam. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam berit olam. Beini ubein b'nei Yisrael, oti le'olam, oti le'olam. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam berit olam. Ki she'et yamim asa Adonai, asa Adonai, et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat l'dorotam berit olam. Ubayom hashvi'i Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash,
songs we've been singing recently are actually recitations of scripture verses from our Torah, but we now enter the next phase of our service, which is the tefillah, or prayer phase of our service. I invite everyone, please, to rise as the cantor and I turn the way to tefillah. May be seated. Continue on page 173, together at the top of the page. In these hours of rest and renewal, open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may this day fulfill its promise. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh ha-Shabbat.
Ooh.
continue at the top of page 177 together. God of goodness, we give thanks for the gift of life, wonder beyond words, for the awareness of soul, our light within, for the world around us so filled with beauty, for the richness of the earth which day by day sustains us. For all these and more we offer thanks. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha u'lecha na'eh lehodot. And continue with Shalom Rav on page 178, the prayer of peace.
Shalom Rav,
Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav, Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam.
Ki ata melech adon, lecho hashalom. Ki ata melech adon, lecho hashalom. Shalom Rav, Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav, Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. B'tov einecha levarech et amcha Yisrael, b'chol עת ובכל שעה, בשלומך. Shalom Rav, Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav, Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam.
Continue together at the top of page 179. Grant us peace, your most precious gift, O eternal source of peace. Give us the will to proclaim its message to all the peoples of the earth. Bless our country as a safeguard of peace, its advocate among the nations. May contentment reign within our borders, health and happiness within our homes. Strengthen the bonds of friendship and fellowship among all the inhabitants of every land. Plant virtue in every soul, and may the love of your name hallow every home and every heart. Praised are you, Eternal One, who blesses our people with peace. Baruch atah Adonai, hamivarech et amo Yisrael b'shalom. We're going to jump ahead to page 371 for our Misha Berach prayer of healing.
May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen.
Think of our friends, our family, anyone that we know who may be in need of healing at this time, and we share their names out loud for everyone to hear so that we can all include them in our own prayers. Is there anyone in the first row is thinking of anyone?
Tracy, Holly, and Lisa.
Sure. Anyone in the second row? Sure. Are there any names you care to add? Great. Any more names? Yeah, we have that.
Mishabeira imotenu mekor habracha lavotenu
180, where we will resume after a silent prayer. When I was first ordained and looking for my first position as a rabbi serving a congregation, the congregations at the time were forbidden to ask rabbinical candidates whether they would perform at interfaith weddings, a wedding in which there's a Jewish person marrying someone who's not Jewish. And I thought it was ridiculous that they had a rule that you couldn't ask the rabbi whether that was his practice or not. There are some rabbis who do officiate at interfaith weddings, and there are some rabbis who do not. And it seems to me that before you would sign a contract for a rabbi, you'd want to know what their practice is. Secondly, a rabbi's position on officiation is an important issue facing the whole congregation, and the needs of each congregation varies. And it's important that it's a good fit with the congregation. I also felt, why should anything be taboo, let alone an issue that really matters to people? It was always one of the first questions that I was asked anyway, so I figured, what's the point? The Placement Commission had a few points. They argued that a rabbi's opinion on officiation is important, but should that really be more important than all their other functions as the religious leader of the congregation? Furthermore, the rabbinate has traditionally been opposed to intermarriage, so that is the sort of traditional position. And lastly, I think there was concern that Reform rabbis who choose not to officiate at interfaith weddings shouldn't be penalized in any way or prevented from obtaining a position just because they choose to be more traditional in their practice. Well, when I went through the rabbinical placement for the first time after visiting congregations in Chattanooga, Baton Rouge, California, Toronto, and the Berkshires, I found myself at a congregation where the senior rabbi that I was working with refused to officiate at interfaith weddings. As the assistant rabbi, it really wasn't my place to be trend-setting for the congregation. And fortunately, I had colleagues in the area who were happy to officiate at interfaith weddings. So if anyone asked me to officiate, although I wasn't allowed to in that congregation, I had colleagues that I could recommend. Many of us have heard the arguments against interfaith marriage. Some say that Judaism has always been opposed to intermarriage, and to reverse course would be to change the very essence of what it means to be Jewish. Others say that exogamy, marrying someone who's not a member of the tribe, so to speak, would lead first to dilution and then the extinction of the Jewish people. There's also the question of why a rabbi would be the appropriate person to officiate at an interfaith wedding in the first place, and whether the sacred ritual of Kiddushin is truly suitable for an intermarried couple. But let's take some of these theories and inspect them a little closer. Starting with the theory that Judaism has always been opposed to intermarriage. Well, our Torah does teach that when the prophet Ezra brought a saving remnant of the Jewish people to rebuild the second temple in Jerusalem, he was shocked to find that many of the Jews had married Babylonian women. And he actually ordered that the returning Jews should divorce their wives and abandon their children that they had with those wives, as disturbing as that may be to us in our contemporary mindset. Also in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 3, there's an explicit prohibition against intermarriage with Canaanite women. These illustrations make an impression, and it would be hard to argue that the Torah has a strong position in favor of intermarriage, but let's be open-minded here. First of all, the only commandment on the subject, and there's only one, refers explicitly to Canaanite idol worshippers, and there are no Canaanite idol worshippers today. They no longer exist.
You never know.
What was that?
I said you never know.
You know, well, maybe you'll bring them back, Marilyn, but I don't personally know any of them. If the commandment were intended to apply to all people who are not Jewish, then it would have been more explicit and it would have said so. Interestingly, there is no other commandment preventing intermarriage among the remaining 612 commandments that are found in the Torah. Then one has to consider the fact that the forefathers themselves all intermarried. We say that Abraham was the first Jew, therefore his marriage to Sarah must have been an interfaith marriage. We say that Jacob lived with his uncle Laban so that he could find a good wife or two. However, when he leaves, his wife Rachel steals her father's idols, an indication that Jacob's mother's side of the family weren't exactly Shomer Shabbos. And you may not know this, but Moses was married to a Midianite and or a Cushite. The Cushites were Africans from Ethiopia. He had a wife who had dark-colored skin. The rabbis bend over backwards to say that Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, Rachel, Zipporah went through a conversion process, but I can assure you there were no conversion processes to speak of in the biblical time period. There were no rabbis, there was no mikvah. Judaism, as we know it, did not exist. To become Jewish in those days meant to marry a Jewish person and to do what they do. And that would describe most of the intermarried couples that I know today. Let's take a closer look at this concept of exogamy. The theory is that if our Jewish daughters were to take non-Jewish husbands, they would then renounce their religion and all their descendants would be cut off from Judaism. Let's just poke a few holes in that theory. First of all, in my profession, I happen to be acquainted with more intermarried couples than the average person, perhaps. Are there cases where the Jewish spouse renounces Judaism? Well, sure, there's a few, but those incidents are really aberrations. They're on the periphery. More often than not, I see that whether or not they happen to be members of a congregation or synagogue, a sense of Jewish identity is in fact instilled in the children, and the Jewish holidays are celebrated in the home. And if I'm being honest, it is not uncommon for the non-Jewish parent to feel an even stronger commitment to raising the children Jewish than the Jewish parent sometimes does. The fact of the matter is that Jews have been marrying non-Jews since biblical times, and that has been the least of the threats to our existence. On the contrary, exogamy has brought certain skills and qualities to the Jewish people. Non-Jewish spouses know how to use power tools. Non-Jewish spouses often raise athletic Jewish kids who can compete in sports.
They can even fix their own car.
They can even fix their own car sometimes, which is amazing. Seriously, we need to spend less time fearing what intermarriage is going to do to harm Judaism and more time appreciating what it has done to offer Judaism. The fact of the matter is that human beings fall in love with one another. It's in our nature. Jews and Gentiles have been intermarrying from time immemorial. There's nothing that any rabbi can say that's going to prevent that from happening. However, a rabbi can play a dangerous role in making an intermarried couple uncomfortable in the synagogue. Think about it. If a couple were to come to me to ask me to officiate at their wedding, and I told them as delicately as I possibly could that that was something I could not do, then no matter how nicely I might try to frame it, there's a high risk that that couple is never going to feel comfortable in my synagogue ever again. And for a number of couples, that feeling of rejection could turn them off to all synagogues. and perhaps they might have negative feelings about Judaism altogether after that. On the other hand, if I perform the wedding, then their marriage begins with a positive connection with the rabbi welcoming them into the community. In many cases, after a number of years, the non-Jewish spouse actually wants to become Jewish. In those cases, intermarriage is actually a net gain to Judaism. One last thing about the fear of exogamy. If you do the math, if one Jewish man marries one Jewish woman, and they have 2 Jewish children, you have 4 Jews. But if 2 Jews marry people who aren't Jewish, and they each raise 2 Jewish children, you have 6 Jews already, and there's still the potential for 7 or 8. Let's not forget the reality of the opposite phenomenon. If one apathetic Jewish man marries one apathetic Jewish woman, and they decide not to raise their children with any Jewish upbringing, they could be cutting off future generations from their Jewish heritage. I'll take the 2 intermarried families raising their kids Jewish over the 2 unaffiliated Jewish families any day of the week. Moving on to the question of whether a rabbi is really an appropriate practitioner to perform the ceremony, and the corollary regarding the sanctity of the Jewish wedding ritual. I hear the argument that an interfaith couple does not actually need a rabbi to perform the ceremony. They can get a justice of the peace if their wedding is essentially a secular experience for them. Honestly, I don't want to be hired to perform what I consider a sacred ceremony if the reason for retaining the rabbi is simply to appease someone's in-laws. For that matter, I don't want to invoke the traditional 7 blessings if they're essentially meaningless to the couple involved. If a Jewish wedding is not what you want, then a rabbi is not who you want to perform it. On the other hand, in addition to wanting to welcome the intermarried couple with open arms, I can think of a number of reasons why it would be most appropriate for a rabbi to perform the wedding. First of all, I can help facilitate conversations about what it would be like for the non-Jewish spouse to be married to a Jewish person. As a rabbi, I can be available for the couple to study with me about the history and the traditions and the culture of our heritage. If I were performing the ceremony for an interfaith couple, considering raising their children Jewish, I can help them process what that experience is going to be like and anticipate some of the issues that may come up around certain holidays like Christmas or Yom Kippur or Passover. If I say no, then the day that couple leave my office may be the last day they ever set foot in the synagogue. But if I say yes, I can counsel the couple through some of the pitfalls of intermarriage, and I can ease the family's transition into the Jewish community. With regard to the ceremony itself, a number of people have serious concerns about certain aspects of the rituals. The chuppah that we stand under, I think, is no big deal. If that chuppah represents the Jewish home that the couple is building together, then I can't think of anything more appropriate. People say it's not appropriate for a rabbi to marry an interfaith couple using the traditional words Kadat Moshe v'Yisrael according to the laws of Moses. But as we've seen, unless you're marrying a Hittite, a Girgashite, an Amorite, a Canaanite, a Perizzite, a Hivite, or a Jebusite, those are the explicit Canaanites, then there isn't a commandment prohibiting the marriage. And as we've seen, Moses had at least one non-Jewish wife, and Solomon had several. Some question the suitability of the traditional Sheva Brachot, the 7 blessings. But if you take a closer look at the words, the blessings say things like, "Praised are you, Adonai, our God, who created man and woman in your image." That's just one of several references to Adam and Eve, mind you, neither of whom were Jewish. Deuteronomy teaches that we all stand equally before God. Everyone, from the chiefs of the tribes to the water drawers, including even the strangers living among us. The non-Jewish spouse is the stranger among us. As Jews, we know what it means to be a stranger because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. We've been strangers in the diaspora since the temple was destroyed, and our Torah teaches us to welcome the stranger. Similarly, Leviticus teaches us to love your neighbor as yourself. God doesn't want xenophobes, God wants xenophiles. Please don't misunderstand me. It would probably be ideal if every Jewish son and every Jewish daughter married someone who was Jewish, but realistically speaking, and historically speaking, a good number of our people are going to marry men and women who are not Jewish. As a rabbi, I'm far less concerned about intermarriage than I am about the children being raised in connection with their Jewish heritage. If the couple isn't going to have any children, then we haven't lost any Jews to begin with. But if we welcome these families with open arms, then we only stand to gain. Shabbat Shalom. Just a few announcements before we begin. We've got several flyers out in the lobby about a number of events that we've got coming up in the near future. Let me just see if I can put just the April ones in chronological order here. Let's see. Okay. We've got my class, What Does Judaism Say About Death and the Afterlife, on Thursdays at 7, weather permitting. Hopefully we won't have too much more snow this year. We have our Temple Shalom Passover Seder. Bring your friends, bring your family, RSVP, let us know that you're planning on coming. We have our own Nadine Strawson. This is a member of our congregation who's also a former president of the American Civil Liberties Union. She has a new Oxford University Press coming out. It's a book coming out. It's entitled Hate, Why We Should Resist It with Free Speech, Not Censorship. It's coming out like a day or two before she comes and speaks here. This is the place that she has chosen to debut her new book. There's going to be a big crowd of people here coming to support her and to hear what she has to say. She's a phenomenal speaker. I've heard her speak several times, and it's going to be one of the highlights of the year. April 13th, we're going to be observing Yom HaShoah, the day in which we commemorate the Holocaust. April 14th, we're bringing in a reggae band. It's a purely social event, not a religious experience, but we have a member of our congregation who is in a reggae band. His name is Americo Carrasco, and his band is Reggae Bones, and they're going to be performing here April 14th. That's a Saturday night. It's going to be a lot of fun. April 20th, we'll be observing Yom HaAtzmaut. If you can spell it, I'd be surprised. But that's the Independence Day for Israel, and we have a member of our congregation, Rochelle Edingen, who was actually in Israel when Israel became Israel back in 1948. She was in high school, and they all had to graduate a couple months early so that they could serve in the Israeli Defense Forces. She has quite a story to tell, and we're looking forward to it. And the last April event that we've got coming up is Saturday, April 21st. If you'd like to join us on our trivia teams, let us know. We have a number of people who are coming this year, and it's going to be a lot of fun. It's a fundraiser for loaves and fishes. So we're going to continue in our service now with the Aleinu. It's on page 586 in our prayer books. Please rise. I'll be reading on page 595. It's hard to sing of oneness when the world is not complete. Those who brought wholeness to our life have gone, and naught but memory can fill the emptiness their passing leaves behind. But memory can tell us only what we were in company with those we loved. It cannot help us find what each of us alone must now become. Yet no one is really alone. Those who live no more echo still within our thoughts and words. And what they did is part of what we have become. We do best homage to our dead when we live our lives more fully, even in the shadow of our loss. For each of our lives is worth the life of the whole world, and each one is the breath of the ultimate one. In affirming the one, we affirm the worth of each one whose life now ended brought us closer to the source of life, in whose unity no one is alone, and every life finds purpose. Turn to page 598 for the Mourner's Kaddish, and it's our tradition that as I read through the list of yard sites that are observed the anniversary of the passing of a loved one, if you hear the name of a member of your own family, please rise and remain standing. And I will also read through the list of the names of those for whom we're in a year of mourning. And again, if you hear the name of a member of your own family, please rise and remain standing until we all have an opportunity to rise with you. We observe yard sites for Vicky Berensweig, Alfred Cipriani, Ethel Ribstein, Clara Abramson, Frida Sandelman, Anna Kramer, Francis Glassberg, Francis Probstein. And we're in the year of mourning for Hyman Seufer, Michael Couturier, Roberta Marsh, Andrew Whitstein, Saul Bresnick, Nehemiah Laser, and Harry Road. Are there any additional names to add? Say Zichrono Levacha, the memory of each one. It's a blessing. We rise together as one support congregation to recite the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'yamad divrach yoteh v'yoknech malchuteh, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayeh l'chol Beit Yisrael, v'agalah v'zman karev v'yimru Amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevorach le'olam olamei amayah. Yitbarach v'yishabach v'yitfa'ar v'yitramah v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yithalal shemei kudashah b'rechu. Le'ela mikol berchata v'shirata. Tushbachata v'nechmata. Damiran v'alma v'yimru Amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya. V'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. Oseh shalom v'ramav. Uyachaseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. And the one who creates harmony and high bring peace to us, to all Israel, and to everyone in the world. And let us say, Amen. Oseh shalom, shalom, shalom. V'ramav uyachaseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. You may be seated. Our closing song is Adonai Os. It's on page 642. It's words from Psalm 29, verse 11. May God grant strength to our people. May God bless our people with peace.
Adonai,
Oz le'amo yitein. Adonai, Oz le'amo yitein. Adonai, Oz le'amo yitein. Adonai yivarech et amo.
Adonai,
Adonai v'yishmerecha, may God bless you, may God protect you. Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha, may God's presence surround you, may God have compassion upon you. Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom, may the Spirit of God be uplifting and inspiring to you, may God grant you the gift of shalom. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Please join us for a kiddush and a motzi in the other room. I got a new challah recipe today, so we'll see how it turned out.
I'll give it to
Was it your granddaughter?
Oh, yeah, sure. You know, I was making them anyway, so I figured